everybody. Welcome to Who Gave Jeff Allen a Podcast with this crazy lady right here. We're so happy to have you, and we're so excited to be here. And we have a very special guest today that I've only met once for like 2 minutes, so Jeff's going to tell you all about it.
Hey, this friend of mine, Mr. Ron Strand, I met, gotta be 10 years ago, I think. He booked me for a ministry that he did in Southern California, called The Upper Room. And they usually do music, but they brought in a comedian that night. And I love telling this story because I finished the show. We had a 6 a.m. flight the next day. And my manager comes to me and says, Ron wants you to come to his house and just hang out. And I go, I don't want to go over there. I got an early flight. I said, all right, an hour. That's it, 1 hour. Got over there, we left and went right to the airport at 4 a.m. We hung out all night. We've been good friends ever. It's actually one of my best friends. I love him and his wife, Kathy. And we're going to talk today about The Upper Room, about a documentary that he did called Love Song, based on this the band Love Song from the 70s. He'll explain all that. And a bunch of other stuff. So please help me. One of my good friends, Mr. Ron Strand. It's good to have you, Ronnie. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Carollynn. Pleasure to be here.
So The Upper Room, what was the genesis for that? You wanted to do something, give something back?
Well, The Upper Room, as you mentioned, started out as, it was music, pretty much at the time. Well, I'll go back a little bit. It was something that I started. I met a fella by the name of Ed McGlasson, a former NFL player, at somebody's home. He was an author of a book, and I thought his story was so compelling in his book. I said, hey, would you come to our home group and do the same thing, talk about your book? And so our home group was, 15, 20 people, but we said, hey, everybody invite friends and family. By the time we did that, we had like 80 people. And we couldn't do it in our home, so we did it in the upstairs of an office building that I have in California, in Orange County. And we put a little worship set together at the beginning, and then had him speak. Well, it went so well that we thought, well, we should do this again.
Right.
And then because it was upstairs, we thought, what can we call this? Well, The Upper Room, of course, And so we started. I think we had 2 speakers, that did the first 2. The other one was a fellow by the name of, his name's Duffy, Warren Duffy, who used to be a Christian radio personality in California. But then I started bringing musical acts in. And my genesis in Christian music was back in the 70s. So there was a lot of these old, Maranatha bands, all the old Jesus movement stuff. So I started bringing these guys in and having them come in. And then we started, I don't remember the first comedian we had. It may have been Michael Jr. We had him way back.
Well, he lives out there.
Yeah, he does. And so the way I like to describe The Upper Room is it's not a church. It's something that's outside the walls of the church. But it's somewhere where faith and the gospel can be heard through music, through comedy.
Right.
It's faith-focused and it's family-friendly, although it's mostly adults that come. And we've done it. We started in 2009, and we're still going. And then during COVID, when we couldn't meet, I started a podcast called Real Talk. And so I was able to interview guests that I would typically have into The Upper Room. Of course, Kathy and I saw your comedy act somewhere along the way, but we were rolling. I mean, it was just crazy. And I said, I got to get Jeff Allen here.
Okay, yes.
So that's when we reached out to you, and then you came out, and then you told the story about coming out. And typically what we like to do is we call it the afterglow, We go to my backyard and have in the patio and just have a great time.
Adult beverages, which I didn't buy. I love the fact, and you did the thing, I love this, Bourbon and Bibles, I think it was called. Yeah.
Well, no, it's called, the one I have is called Boys Night Out.
Boys Night Out, okay.
I do it once a month. I still do it in Orange County. I haven't started it here, and I have, just so the folks know, I've relocated from Orange County to Tennessee, but I still go back to Orange County because my business is there.
Carollynn Xavier is familiar with.
Yeah. You mean you came to God's country?
I came to God's country.
I'm glad you escaped.
Yeah, exactly.
So your faith walk, were you born into a Christian family? Did you find faith later? Kind of how do you go from born to upper room?
Well, I was born into a mild faith family. They had a faith background, but it wasn't real strong. It was, we went to church on Christmas and Easter.
Yeah.
Presbyterian church. My mother was Sicilian. She came from a Catholic background. My dad's Norwegian. He came from a Protestant background. So we kind of gravitated to the Presbyterian church.
That's a good settle for the two. Light liturgical.
Yeah, light liturgical. I like that. But no, I really found my own faith when I was 20 years old. And that's a whole nother interesting story. But and so my faith walk began there, and that was in 1976. And then I was in the ministry. I was a youth pastor at Calvary Chapel in Whittier, California, back in the day.
Oh, so you've always been attached to kind of the Jesus Revolution, Calvary Chapel.
Yeah, I was, not long after I made a commitment to Christ, I felt a real strong calling to do ministry. And so it just whatever happened that came about, that I was doing a little Bible study for young people at this church, and they said, well, would you come on staff and take over the college and career ministry, which I did for a few years. And then, we went different ways at some point. That's a whole nother story as well. But
we got time.
Am I allowed?
How many episodes do we have?
Yeah.
Am I allowed to ask about how you became a believer in your 20s?
Yeah, you want to take the time to go into that?
I do.
Well, sure,
Do you?
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's all we have are stories.
Okay. Well, that's one thing.
And essentially, as a friend of yours for over 10 years, I never really bothered to ask.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Had to get you on a podcast to ask.
Well, yeah, and testimony is a very powerful vehicle.
It is.
So, I was, I was a 19, 20-year-old typical Southern California boy, just having fun. I wasn't a crazy. I wasn't into drugs, but I liked to party. I liked to drink and so forth, and so I was living my life. I was, first couple of years into college. But my best friend at the time, who was Catholic, he went through kind of a crisis, and then he made this, what I call it at the time, very religious conversion, But he got involved in the charismatic renewal in the Catholic Church. And so I was dating this gal at the time, and it was only a few months into dating her. And one day I was working a part-time job, and she says, well, why don't you come on over tonight? And she was living with her parents at the time, obviously. And after you're off work. So I said, okay. So I pull up, and I knock on the door, and her mother answers the door with this real strange look on her face. She says, Renee's not herself. And I said, well, what's going on? She says, well, I don't know. This morning she went into the bathroom and cut off her hair. She had this long, dark hair. And then she kind of ran off. And I'm a 20-year-old kid. I want to have fun, It's like, I don't know if I bought into this, So I went in and...
I only liked her for her hair. I mean, what are we doing?
Yeah, and you cut it off. So I went and I sat down on the couch, and there was kind of a corner group couch. And she came out, and she sat down, but she was real kind of like this when she came out, just kind of head down, and was like not herself. And I thought, this is really awkward.
Wow.
So we were sitting there, and I was trying to make small talk, and then all of a sudden she looks at me and she goes, "You're the devil. You're the devil." And she just started coming unglued. And this is not long after The Exorcist had come out. So I didn't know what I was expecting, but that movie scared the dickens out of me.
I went with 12 baseball players, all guys,
Yeah.
and I'm not lying. At one point, 12 girls come walking in, and we turn around and go, "Ladies!" And they just did an about face and sat in the back. And I had two Catholic friends. The rest of us were heathens and atheists, so it didn't affect us at all.
Yeah.
But these two Catholic kids, man, we had to talk them off the way. I mean, they were freaking out,
yeah.
man.
Well, that movie scared me. And so when I see this girl manifesting, it was really, it was a shocker for me. And it scared me in a spiritual sense that I didn't have. And I thought, I don't know what's going on with her. She wasn't into drugs. And so I didn't know what to do. So her parents had actually gone out and asked the neighbor girl to come over and kind of be with her. And her neighbor friend was in the back room, and she heard this going on. She comes running out. She looks at me, and we look at each other.
They kept their dinner reservations while their daughter was possessed.
Really, as I look back and I think about it, I thought that's really interesting that they actually went out.
Yeah.
So
it's a phase. She'll fade out. Don't worry about
The hair will grow
She
back.
does this every week.
It's
normal.
fine.
This is normal for 20-year-olds.
Exactly.
Yeah, yours spits blood too? Weird.
So this girl comes out, and we're kind of looking at each other like, just because. And so she says, well, maybe you better leave. And I says, yeah, maybe I better leave. So I jumped in my little Volkswagen Bug, and I drove back home. And
The devil drives a Volkswagen Bug.
No, that was me. Right?
I know.
I know,
Oh,
but you
yes,
called
I'm
you
the
the
devil.
devil.
That's right, I'm the devil.
And
Yes.
then you just leave sad and get into a Volkswagen.
Yeah.
Volkswagen.
The horn's coming out. So I get home, and I'm in this quandary. Like, it scared me. What was that just happened?
Yeah.
And I didn't have a faith base, but so my only friend that I knew that was religious was my friend Kip, who I mentioned earlier, who became a charismatic Catholic. He was always a Catholic, but he got and he and I kind of drifted apart because he got real religious, Yeah. So I called him. I said, hey, Kip, this just happened to me. I said, what do you think? He says, I don't know. That's kind of weird. He says, but I've got a friend who's really studies the occult. He says, why don't you come over, we'll go over his house.
Oh, my gosh.
And,
Scary, huh? Yeah. Good on you for not just blocking her number and ghosting her.
Well,
Way to go.
There was no blocking and ghosting.
that's right. And we didn't have cell phones. But so we went over to this friend's house, and we went in this little back room he had in his backyard, kind of behind the garage, and he had all these books in there. This, just a student of all this stuff. And I sat there and I told him the story, and he just sat down. He says, well, I can't tell, but just what you said. He says, sounds rather demonic, But then he turned it on me. He says, but Ron, the deal is, where are you with Christ? And he shared the gospel with me. And Kip had been sharing the gospel with me, but it was kind of like, yeah, later, I don't, I'm not ready for that. And so I actually reluctantly, I say, this is the thing I say, I was scared into the kingdom of God. It was kind of like Paul getting knocked off the horse in that regard. It was like I wasn't going in that direction. I wasn't going away from it, but I just wasn't embracing it.
Yeah, I just wonder how many people are saved by those billboards that go, are you going to hell?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh!
Call 1-800-TRUTH.
Yeah, call 1-800. I'm going.
Well, I knew this. I knew that the thing that scared me was spiritual oppression, something that like when I saw in The Exorcist, I thought that's something I can't control. I could control everything else, but if there's a spiritual presence or something, that scared me.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, I'm going to be safe. Okay, I'll say this prayer. Receive Christ into my life, and I did. And then my friend said, well, you want to make your faith public, because Jesus said, confess me before men, I'll confess you before,
For my Father.
Right. So I went to Calvary Chapel in Costa Mesa, was having these Saturday night concerts for young people. And then they do an altar call at the end. You want to confess Christ. So I went forward, and I did that. And then they usher you all into this back room to kind of, help you get started in your faith, give you a Bible. And they broke you up into little groups. And the gal that was leading our group, she says, okay, well, now that you're a Christian, you need to kind of disassociate with the people that aren't Christians.
Really?
Don't drink, don't. It was all these don'ts. And that wasn't typically Calvary Chapel. I mean, it was.
Wow.
But it was, it didn't appeal to me. It was like, I didn't sign up for this.
It doesn't sound very Christ-like.
Well,
I've always said that if Jesus returned tomorrow, do you think he's going to go to the big temples, or do you think he's going to go down to the AIDS clinic?
Well, exactly. But, it was a young girl
clinic.
who was just,
Right.
probably just freshly saved too, and she did.
So you have to shave your head too?
Well, yeah, getting close to that. But I didn't like that. I didn't, it didn't appeal to me. But what I did like about that is I liked the atmosphere in those Christian concerts. The music was, it was kind of the early birth of Christian music.
Right.
And so I related to the music, and then I started listening to Pastor Chuck Smith, who was the founder of Calvary Chapel, and his teaching was just great, and it just got me fascinated into the Word of God. And so shortly after that, I started getting a desire to really study the Word of God. And then I started feeling like, I want to share this. I want to share this faith. And this is probably almost a year into my walk of faith.
Could I ask you one question?
Sure.
I'm so sorry.
I'm probably
Forgive me.
over-talking.
No,
so-
you're not. That's what you're here for.
That's what
That's why we
that's
brought you
what-
here.
Right.
No, was Renee okay?
A good question. I'm glad you went there. She ended up going into a mental institution. And she was catatonic for several months.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
And they, the mother later told me that they, that next day after that, she ran out. The father had to chase her down. She ran into traffic, and they had to tackle her, and they had to strap her down because she was it was just this, looking back at it now, 45 years ago, plus whatever it was, I've always thought it was demonic, but she wasn't somebody who dabbled in the occult. She was a good Catholic girl. She was, she wasn't into drugs. It could have been something that was just an emotional breakdown. I don't know. But she, and so take 6 months' time here. I'm a Christian now, and I'm thinking, okay, well, I need to do the Christian thing. Maybe I should go visit her. So I was in communicate with her mom, and I called her. I said, what do you think if I went and visited her? She says, well, she's still really afraid of you.
Well, you're the devil.
Volkswagen.
Yeah.
Volkswagen. So she says, well, yeah, we set a date, and I went and saw her, and it was the most sad thing. She just didn't even look like herself. She came walking out, just kind of shuffling, emaciated, just didn't look good.
Meds probably.
Well, it was
kind of
all
stuff,
that. Yeah,
potentially.
it was all of that stuff. And, and I'm just a young guy. To me, it was like, this is not, I didn't sign up for this. But I just went, with that heart of compassion, I guess you'd say. And, it was tough making conversation because what do you say to the devil?
Yeah.
But,
So when did you meet Kathy?
well,
His
okay,
wife.
well, this is where it gets a little more interesting. So,
She was the nurse at the mental.
So I kind of went and saw Renee through that time, and she got better and better and better and better. And then we were just kind of friends, right? Well, now I was in the ministry, and I was a youth pastor, and she contacted me, and I told her what I was doing, and she says, well, I'd like to come out to your youth group thing. So I said, yeah, sure. So she started coming out, and again, we were just friends at that point. And then she started wanting to kind of maybe get back together, and I wasn't really feeling it at the time because I'd actually met Kathy at my youth group, and so I had to tell her that I'm the devil, so I'm going to let you down. That's terrible. I should maybe strike that, but.
No, I was just thinking, I'm so lucky that my husband thinks bipolar sexy, because otherwise he would have found a Kathy. So I'm like, yeah, he's into that. Mental institution, baby, let's do it.
Yeah.
Well, I met Kathy, and then we had a very brief courtship and got married 10 months after I met her. We dated for 2 months, got engaged, and 8 months later we were married. Renee ended up getting married. She invited us to the wedding. We went to the wedding, but I've since lost touch with her. I haven't seen her for all those years. But that's where I met Kathy.
Okay. And then your business, I found that a fascinating story because I love talking to entrepreneurs because I'm not one.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always fascinated on where does the idea come from? I mean, obviously, to be a successful entrepreneur, you find a need, you fill the need, and people pay you to fill the need.
Right.
So you're married, And you're a salesman, I think, at this point.
I am. I got a job. Well, yeah.
You got out of the youth ministry because it pays so well.
Well, that was part of it, but we kind of had a divergence of thought process. They were embracing a direction that I wasn't real fond of. And so they very politely says, well, maybe you ought to rethink your calling.
Theologically or flavor-wise?
Theologically, not so much, but directional in terms of the way they were going was embracing something that was, to me, a lot of emotional stuff, you know.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah, and, so that's, again, another story for another time. But so we parted company. Put it bluntly, I was fired. And so,
So they were trying to use a lot of emotion to kind of manipulate people?
Well, I'll tell the story. We were at Calvary Chapel, and Calvary Chapel is where I got saved. Calvary Chapel is very structured on the Word of God, teaching the Word of God, and but the pastor at this church started embracing, at the time, the Vineyard was coming out under John Wimber, and they were into signs and wonders, very charismatic, and I consider myself a mild charismatic, but
I like charismatic light. It makes me
charismatic
real happy,
light.
just a little bit. Like, ooh, what's the Spirit doing in your life?
Right.
Ooh, but there's no snakes.
Well, I embrace it, but I didn't like the emotional aspect of those things. And I thought a lot of it was just man-made manifestation stuff that it didn't. And I was teaching a group of young people because where we were in Whittier, we were in close proximity to Biola College.
Oh, right.
Which is a very conservative, it was at the time, very conservative Christian college. So I had a lot of, very conservative Christian people coming. And it was the largest group in the church outside the church itself. It was very dynamic and moving. But they came in and did some of their stuff at my group, and it really wreaked havoc in the group. And so they looked at that as my failure. And that was kind of what was the genesis of parting companies. Like, well, you must be failing because your numbers are dropping. So.
Well, I asked about the emotional thing because it surprised me that you said that, because I feel like I hear so much about people. You weren't talking about music, but I hear that all the time about Christian worship music, which are so, from what Jeff's told me, in the space with the new documentary. So I just wondered if that's what you were saying. Like, oh, well, this is too emotional driven to get people saved and all of that, and which makes me sad because I really thoroughly enjoy Christian worship music, and I feel like people are so harsh on the catalyst to get someone. But if it wasn't for modern Christian worship music, which is from the genesis of the people you're talking about,
That's right.
I wouldn't be with Christ right now if that wasn't. So it's such a powerful piece. So when you said emotional, I was like, I wonder if it had something to do with music. But you're talking about pulling people out of the audience and kind of that kind of...
Well, yeah, and I probably need to clarify. I backed into that by saying emotional. I love the Vineyard. I love, I have a lot of friends in the Vineyard. I'm not here to bash the Vineyard. I'm not here to bash Calvary Chapel. I've been around long enough to see movements in the church. And so, I think I've been able to step back and look at things. It wasn't the direction that I wanted to go at the time.
Which I totally understand.
Yeah, and so it wasn't that they were bad or that they were off theologically. I just felt that their overemphasis on the spiritual gifts was not in the vein that I was moving in, and that's why we parted company there. But you had a question in there, and it was a very profound question, and now I forgot.
I'm so
it.
sorry. No, I don't mean to keep interrupting. You were talking about being an entrepreneur, and then I hijacked. I'm so sorry.
Oh, well, that was the point. I just I found it again a fascinating story how you wound up doing what you're doing now because out of a need.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly true. And that's why I tell that backstory, because here I am, I'm 24 years old, about 2 months away from getting married, and fired from the ministry with no vacation.
That's just a sad sentence. Fired from the ministry.
Well,
no severance package, no eternal. I got an eternal severance package.
Well, the pastor of the church, who's since passed away at this point, so I'm not going to name his name, but looked at me, and this is a man I looked up to very strongly, and the associate pastor there as well. He looked at me and he says, Ron, we feel like there's a party going on inside, and you're outside of the window, outside looking in the window, and going, oh, that's great, but you don't want to come in and enter in. And I said, well, that's probably about right, you know. And basically what he ended up doing is saying, well, you know, I think it's time that we part company. Maybe you should reconsider your calling, which really hurt me at the time. You know, a young man thinking I felt this was my calling, you know, and now I'm asked to reconsider my calling. So it was a damaging time for me as a young man.
I understand it. I had a guy tell me a year and a half into comedy, he goes, you do know you'll never make a living at this. In other words, you might want to rethink your calling.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it's like, you know, my response was thank you.
Right.
Because nobody that's ever made anything of their life has not had some pinhead in the past tell them you're not making anything of your life. So
exactly.
Right. And then I find out, during COVID, the government told me that my calling was non-essential.
Well, yeah, there's a whole other thing. Well, they told the church that too.
That's right. But thank God the strip clubs were open because Congress has to meet.
Well, yeah, and the bars and the liquor stores.
Anyway, of course, this is ADD, by the way.
Squirrel.
Welcome to my mind.
Yeah.
So anyway, now you're
I'm
unemployed, newly
unemployed,
married,
and so you know, what do? I got a wife now. You know, I'm going to be married, and so I just went out and kind of faked it till I made it. I had no experience in sales, but I went and I ended up getting a job with this chain link fence manufacturer, selling truckloads of chain link fence to fence contractors up and down the state of California. And I did that for a while.
It was for prisons.
I did sell fence to prisons, actually.
prisons, right?
Yeah. So I did that for a while, and then that job ended, and I was working for a plumbing contractor, and then that job kind of ended. And at that point, I got into another industry, which was the engineering blueprint. What was it called? It was a company that sold architectural media, that kind of thing. And
because they used to draw it.
that's right. They used to draw it. And so I thought, I don't want to be doing this. I want to do my own thing. I didn't like being locked into that. So we had just bought our first home, or second home, because this is a few years later now. And I ended up getting fired from that job, not for any other reason other than they were just going in a different direction. And so, again, here we are faced with, and we had our first child.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, what am I going to do? So Kathy, my wife, says, why don't we go out and maybe get a few house cleaning, things that we could do to make ends meet until you find another job. So she went out and did that. And then actually what she did is she said, I want to go buy in some businesses and see if they want janitorial service. So with no experience that she had, none whatsoever, came back with close to $1,000 in monthly contracts, at the time, which was a big deal. And so I thought, well, if she could do that, what can I do, Yeah. And so I went out and started selling. I put a little flyer together. It just said, office cleaning, call Kathy, kind of thing. And started developing the business, developing. And that turned into something that we could put both feet into. And that was around 1986-ish, somewhere in there. And
how many states are you in right now?
Well, at the highest we were in 29 states, but now we're in, I think, about 10, which doesn't mean our sales dropped. Sales have actually increased, but it was a change in some of the customer base. And we've kind of focused in different direction. Now we focus in resort properties, hospitality, and medical facilities. So, we built quite a business over the years. So I've been a businessman, and all that time that I've been a businessman, I've always been involved in ministry, whether it was I led worship at a church for 10 years, and, we've had our...
Well, that was one of the things I wanted to get to with the upper room. You funded that.
Yeah.
And I love the night I was there and you passed the hat around. It's like, hey, folks, it would help out if you could just throw a few bucks in that. It comes, he looks, it's like $7. 300 people. I mean, it was. I laughed. I mean, I laugh at your pain, but you did out of your own pocket. You funded the Upper Room, and you brought the talent in, and I did make a taping there. That's how good the audiences were.
That's right.
And,
I think your second
visit there. How wonderful they were there.
And at one time, you said it was one of your favorite rooms to play.
It was, because it was perfect comedy room, because the ceiling was really low.
Yeah.
And you'd open up the curtain, and we'd fill in the seats. And it probably helped me sell out the Irvine Improv the first time.
Well, there might be some back royalties from me then. So.
I'm guessing. I'm guessing.
But yeah, that was, that's what we did. And to your point about doing it on a donation basis, that was always my aim. I didn't want to charge people, because then it becomes business-like, and it's business-driven. And so, we underwrote a lot of it because the donations never rose to the level to cover the cost. And so, it's things changed when COVID hit, because no longer could we meet, in the building that we were renting. And then we started the podcast. And so we do occasional shows now. We were doing them once a month. And we started moving more and more toward a lot of the comedy, and kind of interspersing comedy and music. And so that's where we are with it. And then with our move from California to Tennessee, we're kicking around the idea to do something here. I don't know.
But what's cool too, you got a chance. Almost like when I started with Bill Gaither. Gaither loved bringing the gospel singers that he grew up listening to along with him. Yeah. You got a chance to bring in the people you listen to. Now that's cool. Yeah. As a matter of fact, one of them I think was staying at your guest house when I visited the first time. So talk about that a little bit. I mean, what an opportunity it is to reach out and bring.
Ron Pearson, everybody.
No, it's Tammy Allen, my wife. She knows what I'm doing. She does it all the time. I mean, I'll be on stage at 7:30 in the evening. She goes, "What are you doing?" I go, "Hey, everybody, say hello to Tammy." Oh my gosh, I forgot. I go, "Where did I leave the house?" Got on an airplane, flew here.
A lot of the times it's his friend, and who's become a friend of mine too, Ron Pearson.
Oh, yeah, I know Ron very well.
Ronnie, he called two weeks in a row right in the middle of the podcast.
It's so funny.
And one time we left it on, and he goes, "I couldn't hang up. It was 20 minutes. It was interesting."
Oh, yeah. No, Ron's a great guy.
Okay, so
you got the chance to book these artists, and then that'll lead into what was the desire behind doing the you've been working on this documentary a while.
Going on 8 years.
Yeah, we got a chance to see the first episode. And by the way, it is worth a look if you have any interest at all in the history of the Jesus movement.
To your point, I was able to start booking a lot of these guys that were still out doing it, that were really instrumental in my early faith and music-wise, who ministered to me. One of my favorites was the group Love Song, and the head writer out of that group is a fellow by the name of Chuck Girard. And he had a long solo career. So both of his solo music and Love Song's music really played a big part in my early faith, because it was something I could dig my teeth into. If you listen to Love Song's music, it's kind of a cross between Crosby, Stills, Nash meets the Beach Boys.
It's California.
It's California. Well, yeah, it is, and it's folky rock. It's and so Love Song was one of the first bands. I'm not going to say they were the first. Larry Norman was out doing what he was doing back in the day. But they came out in 1970, 71. And if you watch the documentary, I won't tell the story here, but it's a great story how they came to faith and how they got into the church. But so I had Love Song come to the Upper Room, I think 2 or 3 times. But the last time was
they were doing huge festivals.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. They were all over they did Explo 72 in Dallas. They became nationally known and actually internationally known. They were a huge success in the Philippines. Go figure. But so the last time in 2017 when I invited them to come, I said, "Hey, what do you guys think if we tape the show, videotape the show, and we put out a live DVD, see, live from the Upper Room, Love Song?"
Right.
Because these guys were all reaching the point in their career. They're going to be doing this,
Right.
And so we thought, great. So we put this thing together. I hired this whole video crew to come in, 4 cameras, a big boom that came in, swept across the stage. I thought, great, this is going to be wonderful, you know, because they were really good. The funny thing is, you know, I went to see Crosby, Stills, and Nash about, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, and they didn't sound good vocally at all, you know, older guys. But Love Song really maintained their chops, and they're great harmonies, wonderful harmonies.
It's because they had the Lord. I shouldn't say that about Crosby, Stills, and Nash. They probably have the Lord. But for people that are my age, there was a time where Christian worship music didn't exist.
That's right.
It was just your grandma butchering the hymnal. So this is like a big deal. When he says you can sink your teeth into it, it's because it had harmony.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. One of they were inducted, Love Song was inducted into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame about 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. And they had Michael W. Smith was inducted him. And we've got this in the film. And he says, you know, guys, if it hadn't have been for Love Song, I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing today. And he says, and I mean that. And he said it again recently to one of the band members. So this is how influential those guys were. They really, a lot of as you said, the worship came out of that contemporary Christian music. They weren't even calling it contemporary Christian music, and they didn't have a name for it.
Well, there was no industry.
There was no industry.
No, and like everything, when the labels get wind that people will buy this stuff, then they create a market for it. Yeah. And, but they were just doing it as a calling.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful thing, that you don't start your career in music with the idea that I'm going to be big in this genre or whatever. I mean, I think people do now. Yeah. But back then it was just a calling, and they just loved doing the music.
Oh, that's it.
And it was California, so that was kind of the music going around then. Mm-hmm. But you're right, I listened to the harmonies, and I had never heard of them until your documentary.
Yeah.
It's again, I go back to Gaither bringing out these old gospel singers that you know, I never knew Southern gospel at all, but he extended the lives of these people by putting them on stage, and then the audience is coming to remember. And I think that's what your documentary will do. I really believe it'll start a spark in an interest in those original Christian artists.
We're hoping. Yeah. And so, you know, going back to the live album, you know, we got the footage back, and we realized it wasn't what we could work with, because we weren't directors, and we didn't direct the cameras, and it was just these guys videotaping it. So we went back to the drawing board. What do we do with this? And so we started thinking, well, maybe we can do some interviews, cut in from the concert and do interviews. And then we test marketed that, and people are going, I don't want to see so much of this, you know. And so ended up getting into the hands of a producer in California, and we brought it to a whole new level, and so it's a 3-part episode now, 3 one-hour episodes, 55 minutes. It's called A Band Called Love Song, and so we went back and we interviewed a lot of different. Oh gosh, I'm going to go blank here. Well, Greg Laurie is one of them. Pat Boone's in it. Pat Boone's really gotten behind this. Jeremy Camp, so many people.
Talk about what getting permission to use, because you use a lot of music that isn't love song. Mm-hmm. So talk about that a little bit, just trying to get the rights to be able to play.
Well, yeah, we've done all of this.
People think, you know, these documentaries, I mean, again, we're going back to 2017. Yeah. And it's just now being released. So it has to be a passion, a project of love. Yeah. You don't continue for 8 years on something unless you absolutely love the material. Yeah. And then you get into the legal aspects of it. And I remember you talking about.
Well, yeah, you know, and this thing has all been done on donations, and so we didn't come into this with a big, you know, war chest and say we're going to do this documentary. Right. We backed into this, and it's been a long process. So we've had to raise money while we're doing it, and so when we get to doing, doing some soundtracks of the time, you know, during the '60s, and because the documentary really is band. It's about the band, but it's not necessarily band
No, it
centric.
also covers the cultural times.
It's the cultural
and
times.
stuff
It's
that was going
it's the Jesus
peripherally.
movement. And basically, what I say, if you've seen the movie Jesus Revolution, this is the backstory, because the group Love Song was actually portrayed in Jesus Revolution. Not well, in my opinion, but they were portrayed there. And so they were, they tell the backstory, the real backstory of what happened.
Which I think is so cool, by the way. Culturally, there was all this turmoil going around in the late 60s, early 70s. And in the midst of all of that turmoil was this movement that started basically at the Cove. Talk about the baptisms in the Cove and when that caught fire. And for people who haven't seen the Jesus Revolution, it's worth a look.
Well, in the Jesus Revolution, they had the big baptisms down by the sea. That was happening. And that's, Love Song was there playing worship. Chuck Smith would have thousands of young people come out there, and they would baptize them right there in the Pirates Cove in Corona del Mar in Newport Beach, California. We actually went down there and did some filming.
We used to call them Jesus freaks, because us heathens,
Right.
Is that where that term came from?
Yeah, oh, absolutely, yeah. And then the Jesus Christ Superstar came out on Broadway. So there was all this, internally, externally was all this cultural stuff that was just the drugs, the alcohol, which led into the 80s and the greed. But in the midst of all of that was this movement that started in California and spread literally across the country.
It did.
So Love Song was really right there. And again, I didn't know this until I saw the documentary. I'm really getting into the history of the church now in my own personal life. I'm just fascinated with how did we get here with how we worship? Why do we wind up with 5,000 denominations in different ways? John Christ had a great one. He said it starts with, the guys preaching in a suit and tie, and one day he goes, I'm wearing jeans. So half the congregation goes, we don't like you in jeans. So we're going to start our own thing with no jeans. And then somebody says, well, I want to worship with a guitar, and I want to plug the guitar in. I mean, all this stuff.
Well, that's it. And that's what was so significant about Love Song, because at the time, there was no guitars in the church. There was no drums. I mean, that was verboten. And
I remember the little piano.
Oh, sure. That's what it was. Yeah, and the hymns.
Amazing Grace.
Yeah. And to Chuck Smith's credit, he embraced these guys and brought them in, and they, and it exploded. Hippies, they were coming by the droves.
Yeah.
And, I would go to those Saturday night events, and they would do an altar call at the end, and hundreds of kids would go down. And so people were coming to Christ. And really, it was one of the largest revivals, at least in our lifetime, if not, in the last few centuries. And so you look at the church today, and younger people like you, that there wasn't mega churches back in the day.
Right.
There was, small churches. And so the whole Jesus revolution, or the Jesus movement, if you will, birthed a lot of that, and a lot of the pastors that came out of that, young pastors, not young anymore, but they were then. And because there was such a burgeoning of faith, and, so these churches sprang up, and then they just grew and grew and grew because of the faith that was going, that was happening. People were coming to Christ. And so we've done our best. Tommy Coombs, who's one of the band members, he's Tommy Coombs' band, and they travel worldwide with Franklin Graham. And so he was talking to Franklin about the film, and Franklin said, "Whatever you do, Tommy, make this about the gospel."
Right.
So we took that charge seriously, and we've been very careful to make it about the gospel. It's not in your face gospel, but it's the history of the movement. It's the history through the eyes of the band, and we bring the gospel. It's not one of those things where we do an altar call at the end or anything like that, but the gospel's presented in a way that's which we think is done very well. And so I think we've achieved that. But going back to your other question about trying to get music at the time on a limited budget, we'd try to find some music by, let's say, Crosby, Stills and Nash or something, and we found out that's going to cost us $25,000 to $50,000 to use that little 20-second clip. Well, we don't have that kind of money to do that. Right. So we had somebody
hum it.
we kind of said, here's the spirit of what we want, and kind of to kind of fit that time. And so he wrote little pieces that sounded like that.
Right.
And then we ended up sending it to a musicologist because we had to make sure that it wasn't too close where we'd get sued by trying to copy something. And so we had to pay to go through the musicologist and make sure that it.
Yeah.
But the music does capture the time period. And so that's kind of one of the journeys that we went on, is doing all of that as well.
That's got to be a good feeling, though. I mean, finally,
It's finally.
It's
and
like birthing. This is my baby.
It's been that, and it's.
We're gonna do another one.
My film industry is started and finished with this project.
This one. Yeah.
I'm not a filmmaker, but.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I was thinking on the way over, I was like, what are my feelings? Because we were talking about how, like, a lot of people will say, it's too emotional and it's too this, and modern Christian worship music. And I was thinking, like, well, what are my feelings about it? I've read a whole bunch of people about how, I feel this way or I feel that way. And I was thinking, especially being Orthodox, like, that's obviously a pretty, no instruments, pretty liturgical. And I was thinking, like, okay, well, let's say, because I was raised pretty much atheist agnostic and didn't find, Christ found me, or however that panned out.
Let's get into that one. That can of worms. That'll create some comments.
I was like 30, 31 in there. And if it wasn't for, like I said, if it wasn't for modern Christian worship music and big non-denominational mega churches that kind of were spawned from that Calvary Chapel movement, I don't think, because I was trying to figure out, like, why wouldn't I have just walked into an Orthodox church or like a Catholic church and been like, this is it. This is what I've been waiting for. And I was thinking, like, why was it that for so many people converting a couple thousand years ago? And I was like, oh, because it would be so intuitive. Like, you are a pagan, you're used to rituals and incense and all of the ritualistic traditions of the Orthodox or Catholic Church. So it would make sense to go from, well, I'm no longer going to worship these gods or God, and now I'm going to follow Christ, and this is what that worship looks like.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking, like, well, in the 60s, you have to have some sort of in between, like some sort of stepping stone. Like, I couldn't have walked into a Orthodox church and, like I said, been like, incense was the thing for me the whole time.
Exactly.
And so I needed that, like every big non-denominational church, that welcome home. We've been waiting for you. We love you, and that you are broken and Christ can fix your brokenness. And through music, because as a rebellious teenager, music was how I identified myself. Like, that's how I rebelled towards my parents. I was a punk rocker. Like, I was a vegan punk rocker.
Right.
That was I was a Californian. That was my identity. And then to be able to use this way of finding who I was and explaining to people who I was, and then to be able to take out one type of music and put in another type of music. I guess it's just something I was thinking about on the way over. I just, what are your thoughts on the push against emotional music and converting people with utilizing emotions?
Well, I think there's always room for manipulation. And again, if you've been around long enough, the church, you see spiritual manipulation. Well, and I've seen where people try to manipulate emotions. I don't think that the music that came out of the Jesus movement or the Jesus revolution was geared to that at all. It was real because, as you said earlier, these hippies were coming into faith. And they're not going to come in and listen to, blue-haired grandma on the organ and get behind that.
Yeah.
And so to the credit of, say, Chuck Smith and Kay Smith, his wife, they saw, what was going on in Laguna Beach, which was right nearby where they were. A lot of hippies were there, barefoot, just kind of on the street. And Kay said to Chuck, we've got to find a way to reach these people.
Right.
And Chuck was like, dirty hippies, I don't want to.
I remember. Well, my dad was one of those.
Yeah,
he should introduce me as his daughter.
Yeah,
I had
need
long
to take
hair.
a bath. Yeah. And so, to his credit, they did that. And when this story is told actually by Chuck Smith, who's now since gone, but it was recorded a long time ago. He tells the story of how they came in, and he said even when they came in, I was a little bit leery. I was like, these guys just got saved recently, and they came in this van, and they're hippies, and so he said, well, why don't you play something for me? And they started playing the song "Welcome Back," which was one of their hits. And Chuck said it just grabbed my heart, and he actually started kind of getting very emotional, which is not like him.
And he took a lot of arrows.
He did. He did. He took a lot of arrows
from the conservative.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And because what do you mean you're bringing drums and guitars into church? That's not where it's supposed to be. But that's what happened, and it exploded. It exploded, and it wasn't emotional. It was. I mean, music does.
It was potentially different than what the modern Christian music is now.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, it's interesting to me when you say emotional because I've had moments in church during music and during the message where I've just gotten broken, and I believe that is the spirit within us, and I always said to people that we're repressed Northerners, we get our hand maybe up here if we're really moved, but there have been times where I've gotten my hand up. I mean, I have. I mean it. I mean, it's like,
me too.
And it's not, I don't do it instinctively. There's something where that gets moved inside me where I just go,
you're
"They're
feeling
right.
it.
This is from you."
Yeah.
Holy
well,
cow.
Music is emotional.
Well, it is, and it should be. If it's not moving you one way or the other,
Right.
And, so for Chuck, again, I'm going to the Jesus Revolution. I never met the guy, but he was an old stodgy to them.
Yeah.
He was probably twice their age.
Well, I think at the time he was only 40 years old.
Yeah, he was the man.
Old
yeah,
man.
I know, exactly.
Yeah.
They're in their 20s, and he's 40, and
right.
all of a sudden all these young people are coming out and listening to it. But he had at least, what I liked about it was, and that's where I get migrated towards churches, whether, I don't care, the worship is great, but I want the gospel, I want the word, I want teaching, I want to learn what's in that book by people who have been given a calling and a gift to teach. That's what draws me into where I go to church.
Yeah.
And from what I gathered, Chuck taught basically what you would have looked at and said a conservative message of the Bible is true, it's inerrant, and then amidst all of that, you had this new music, which was again unheard of.
Right.
So I can see the attraction because one, the gospel will draw people, Christ will draw you through His Word.
That's right.
And then you got to be able to. I mean, and I hate to say that. I hate to say the word entertaining, but if you're not gonna, nobody's gonna sit for an hour of you said, listening to Grandma bang out, Rock of Ages.
Yeah, exactly.
on the piano.
Well, Chuck Smith, whom I respect dearly because I cut my biblical teeth in his teaching. He was very faithful, and he would go through the Bible in 1 year, every year. On Sunday nights, he would do several chapters, and then Sunday morning he would teach on, preach on something from there. Thursday night he would go in depth on that particular scripture, or portion of that scripture that they were going through, and so he schooled these young people that were coming in the scriptures and foundational.
And created a discipleship program.
And created discipleship. And so now today there's, I think, well over 2,000 Calvary chapels throughout the world that came out of that whole thing. Chuck didn't have an ego. He wasn't bent on building a church. He was focused on creating, disciples and teaching young people the Word of God. And, he finished well doing that.
Yeah.
And so another story that's funny about, bringing electric guitars and the hippies into the church, I think some of the board members back in the day went to Chuck and said, these dirty hippies are coming in with their bare feet and they're ruining the carpet. And Chuck said, well, then let's remove the carpet. So,
and the gift package was a Bible and soap on a rope.
Exactly. Yeah. So, that's what, those are my origins. I came a little bit later. I got saved in 1976. So the big part of the Jesus, well, not the big part of it because it was still going on, but the genesis of it happened between, let's say, 70 and 73. There was that was kind of a big. I came in 76, but I was well aware of all that, and what was going on, and so that's what we've captured, and so it's going to be. So I was going to tell you this: the film is completely done. This is again 7.5 years in the making. Part of that's been to just raise money and different things happening in people's lives that have kind of had to put it on hold in different places. Yeah, COVID. So we've gone through all
The
that.
scourge.
Yeah. And everything, I mean, we've paid for everything. We don't owe anybody anything. We're trying to raise some last funds to get the marketing phase. But we've got to deal with Amazon. It's going to be on Amazon Prime and with a non-exclusive, so we could put it on other platforms as well. And so we're looking to release this thing, hopefully this summer, if possible. But it'll be 2025 for sure.
We're going to, I'm saying this now, we're going to hold this until probably we know an exact date, and we will put all of that on on the thing, because it's something I think we should all, especially if you're, I always say when I talk about my desire to learn Christian history in a secular comedy club, when I tell the audience, I said, look, it's fascinating stuff, whether an atheist or not, learning about, the human heart is basically, Christian history is a documentary on the human heart. I mean, it's like, it starts out with all these great intentions, and then all of a sudden you realize, hey, man, I can make a few bucks if I do this. Right. And it's interesting you talk about an emotional response. When I started in the church, I had my testimony. That's all I have. That's it. It's all God gave me. I'm not a teacher. I'm not a wise guy. I just have a story. And I realized that I could have. I really could have gotten to a point where I could have done altar. People would say, you got to do an altar call. And I said, I just haven't been called to do that. I feel like my mother was saved at a Billy Graham crusade in an emotional response. Now, I'm not saying that she, up to her dying day, her sisters told me she was fine. She prayed, she did all this stuff, but she never really, in our knowledge growing up, she didn't feed us as a parent, because my father was so upset about the mere mention of Christ's name in our home.
Yeah. He drove a Volkswagen.
He drove a Volkswagen. He was he did actually. One of his great stories was he was he gets pulled over drunk, and he couldn't get his VW to work. And a cop comes to the window and he goes, what's going on? My dad says, I can't get this stupid thing in gear to go. And he goes, could you step out of the car? My dad steps out, he falls down. He had ran over a stop sign, and the stop sign had lifted the rear end. The tires were just...
I can't get it into gear.
I can't. Stupid car. These stupid Germans don't know how to make a car that works. So anyway, we got off the track, but I think that I'm talking to the non-believer who listens to this. If you've made it this far in this conversation, this is a film worth looking at, because I believe there's another revolution coming.
I do too.
I do too.
And that's our prayer.
Yeah, that there's something getting sparked in younger people. I think they're looking around, they're going, we've been sold a bill of goods. Yeah. And they're looking for something.
They are.
And I hope that they tune into to that, and they see maybe their parents' faith in that, because a lot of children walk away from the faith of their parents. Yeah. And they do. It's an individual thing. Yeah. It's a collective, but it's an individual call. Yeah. And Jesus and God will use each and every one of us. We are His instruments. And I can speak after knowing you for all these years. You walk it, and
thank you.
It's an inspiration to be around. And are you going to do the? I still call it Bourbons and Bibles, because
B&O, Boys Night Out.
Boys Night Out.
Yeah, I'm looking. Well, we started doing the poker thing, but we'll probably do something, because I think it's
in a
really
Christian
powerful.
Loving way.
In a Christian loving way.
There's nothing.
Yes. Look, I think it's really powerful for men to get together, and so it's been really positive, a place where guys can just be guys, in Christ. And it doesn't have to be Bible study. We get a lot of Bible study, in church. We get it online. We get it, and there just needs to be places for guys to go and be guys,
Right.
and so that's kind of what that's all about. But going back to your point, and I know you're trying to wrap up, but you mentioned people wanting you to do an altar call.
You picked up on that.
I did, because one of the things that in addition,
My wife keeps calling.
one of the things in addition to the comedy that sucked Kathy and I in when we watched it was back when we had a DVD,
Yeah.
No, a videotape, the big
VHS?
VHS.
Oh, the Happy Wife, Happy Life.
Happy Wife, Happy Life.
Yeah.
But is the way you brought your testimony in was so effortless, and the segue was so real, and it's so powerful. And I'm not telling you this to blow smoke, because and it's one of the things I've always told you, Jeff, when you come, please include the testimony, because it's powerful, and you didn't need to do an altar call. An altar call is just asking people to step up and stand up and come forward. But your testimony is very powerful. And so when you convey that, you communicate it very well. And that's powerful. There's nothing more powerful than the power of testimony.
Well, it's interesting. Tammy told me once, and again, we got to wrap this up, but she said, "Are you even aware that your faith posts outview your comedy posts almost 10 to 1?"
Wow.
Yeah. And it's, again, people seek, they look, and that's God's movement in their lives. It's not anything we do.
Yeah.
I think that if we honor the calling, and again, I only went into the church, and I didn't have anything for ministry. I really didn't. I mean, I can barely remember scripture. I have no memory.
Yeah.
I can't teach. I can't do anything. But I always felt guilty taking money out of the coffers for just doing stand-up comedy. So what do I have to offer back to the congregation? And I had a story coming out of AA about my past and then that conversion. I'm working with Carolynn's husband right now, and I'm working on getting his story out.
Yeah.
He has a powerful story as well.
there's-
They both do.
Well, yeah, no, I've heard part of your story, and it's powerful,
She was how many days from getting an upside down cross tattoo
Wow.
under your eyeball?
Yeah. Well, it's really funny how Satan will trick you when you don't believe Satan exists. Like, I have an upside down cross tattooed on me now. And I go back and forth. I think, should I get it covered? Well, should I go get tattooed again now that I'm a believer? That's always a question I ask for myself. And then sometimes now I'm at a place where I look at it and I think, I'm unworthy of being crucified right side up. And St. Peter was crucified upside down. And so now I look at it with it reminds me of St. Peter, and it reminds me of what he went through and his struggle and his path and his testimony. And so now I have more positive, but it's amazing how when you don't believe the devil exists, like I didn't, how much of the devil you allow into your life. And I mean, I still struggle with a lot of my tattoos and a lot of just it's so funny how the devil will still work his tricks on me, remembering the things I did in the past that were glorifying him, and I didn't even know.
Well, I heard this early on, and this is going to turn into a conversation about Satan, but I love the term author of lies. Christ is the author of truth. The devil's the author of lies. So the question always comes down to, is it true? And then you have to ask, what is your source of information? Because we all have that internal dialogue.
Yeah.
And it says, some of the stuff, if they ever start arresting people for thought crimes, I'm first one out. Because the stuff that flows through here, my fear is that I get to a point in my life where I have no filter. It just comes out. So that's where I begin. Is it true? So when you brain chirps, the first question is it true? If it's true, it's probably coming from Christ. Yeah. And if it's a lie, then it's the author of lies and the devil.
Absolutely.
And that's pretty simplistic, but
Well, yeah. And I also think that upside down cross for you is a remembrance of where you've come from.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I was going to say.
But I also was thinking it depends which way you hold your arm, right?
Yeah.
Is this way or this way? Is
Isn't
it
that the
upside
truth?
down or?
Isn't that the truth? Oh my gosh, I know. But it is like, it's a lady in a coffin. So it's 100% the life I was living at the time. And I didn't even realize it. I just thought it was some band I liked. So it wasn't.
Really?
Yeah. And then now I look down and I'm like, yeah, that's how far I've come.
But see, that's the power of Christ. You know, that's the power of the gospel that can take you from that kind of lifestyle to where you are now and saying, you know, gosh, Christ is real. He's in my life. He's redeemed me, you know, and that's powerful. So when you look at that stuff and you go, that's a contrast. That's where God's brought you, you know. It's a reminder.
It's so true.
You want to wrap us up?
Sure.
Tell us what we got going. What do we got going on?
Oh, can I give the website to the film?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's
Give it into that camera.
Okay, it's Love Song the band. Oh, a band called lovesong.com. A band called Lovesong.
One word, old
It's-
people.
Yeah, it's the website we just finished for the movie, for the film. So
Band called Love Song.
a band called
And on Amazon Prime and probably multiple platforms.
Yeah.
Once the people get it, you're going to share it and you're going to move it on. And speaking of sharing and moving on, please share this podcast, subscribe. The button's around there somewhere. And you know this because you're young. Why is it important for them to make a comment and share it?
Oh, yeah. Even if you hate us, comment, because it drives the algorithm up. So even if you can't stand any of us, be like, I can't stand these people, and why does her hair look like that? It would be phenomenal. We would appreciate your negativity, your positivity. Share it anytime. We're just so grateful you're here, and God bless you guys.